I'm coming out of a dark season of my life. It's a season of grief that started over 5 years ago, towards the end of my marriage. Grief. I know you know what I'm talking about. It's that intermittent darkness, that guttural pain, that deep pressure, like you've got a hole in your stomach. You know that feeling of pain that causes you to double over at times with the intensity of it? I could tell you it hasn't always been this way for me, but it has. Grief and loss is my passion. I often joke with my friends that I'm a walking billboard of grief and loss experiences. I consider myself, though, as someone with an uncanny hope, with an ability to see hope in situations that others may not. It's what makes me good at what I do. I'm a school social worker. I work with students experiencing a variety of emotional and behavioral challenges. My students come from all walks of life, some having been touched by incredible loss, but yet their beauty shines. In my work, I strive to empower my students to see their worth, to see that light that I see, that light that shines from within them. I will admit, in my darkest moments, my hope for others is much clearer than my hope for myself. But that's where my foundation and my faith take over, propelling me forward. Since the beginning of my research exploring the grief and loss experiences of children and teens, I've often been surprised by the many dictionary definitions I find that liken the feelings of grief to the loss of someone to death. I believe society in general equates the feelings of loss with someone who has died. When I ask people, what does grief and loss mean to you? The answer I most typically get is what you go through when someone dies. Yet I know from my research that events such as divorce, parental incarceration, foster care placement, and parental deployment can be just as or even more so impactful on a child or teen as an event such as a death. I've experienced many instances of grief in my lifetime with very little having to do with death. From a young age, I've known loss. As an only child raised by my mother with very little knowledge of who my father was, life for me was difficult, particularly during my teenage years. In my early teen years, I began to put on a lot of weight and was often teased because of it. Yeah, I laughed at the jokes. I even participated in them. But the pain in my heart was real. I know what it's like as a child to move multiple times, to leave old friends behind and to try to make new ones. I know what it's like to feel isolated as a 15-year-old girl, to think harmful thoughts, and to want to end my own life. I know what it's like to make poor choices as a teenager. I know guilt, and I know regret. I know what it's like to meet my father for the first time at 18 years of age, and the subsequent pains of his coming and goings from my life, and the rejection. I know the rejection. I know what it feels like to lose a friend to suicide. But yet, I thrive. My hope for each of you here today is that you would begin to look at grief and loss experiences in a new way. That you would begin to see what I now see. That grief and loss is so much more than death. Today, children and teens globally are being impacted by multiple experiences of grief and loss. Yet I believe they have huge ability to move beyond their circumstances and thrive. So how does one move beyond their circumstances? Recently, While participating in intense therapy, I've begun to recall memories of one person who I see as a key player from my childhood. One person who I believe is vital to me standing before you here today. When I was 3 years old, my mom, who worked 60+ hours to meet our needs, found a babysitter through our local newspaper to care for me. Her name was Mrs. Chapman. Her friends called her Tony, but to me, she was Mrs. C. Mrs. C took care of me from when I was 3 years old until I was 13 years old. Mrs. C was a woman of strong faith, utmost integrity and moral character. She ran her household with military-like order, and even though her countenance was firm and stern, I knew she loved me. When she laughed, her whole face would open up and her eyes would sparkle. As someone who has had little recall of childhood memories, I've recently been flooded with sweet, sweet memories of my childhood, mainly from Mrs. C's house. Smells of shaklee and herbs, tastes of warm grapefruit with honey drizzled on top, images of myself lying on Mrs. C's sheet-covered couch watching endless hours of Little House on the Prairie and Anne of Green Gables. And Mrs. C's dog Angel with that cone collar around her neck because she never stopped licking. Mrs. C teaching me how to set a table. Mrs. C teaching me how to pray. Mrs. C teaching me how to do the laundry. Mrs. C teaching me how to take care of my nails. And that big, big bed, that bed that was so much bigger than me, so big that as a little girl I needed a stool to get on top. It's been in these recent moments, in these sweet, sweet moments of remembrance that I realized everything I've researched these past few years is true. And no matter what I've told myself or what I've believed, what messages I believe to be true, my life is proof of what I've found. Children and teens impacted by multiple instances of grief and loss can lead healthy and successful lives as adults. In my research, I found the Youth Thrive Protective and Promotive Factors framework that highlights how someone like me, who experienced multiple instances of grief and loss, can thrive and lead a healthy and successful life as an adult. One of these factors, social connection, having a healthy relationship with an adult, in my case, as a child or teen, encapsulates quite nicely the relationship I was gifted with Mrs. C. One relationship where that person has not just listened to you, but heard you, validated you, confirmed you, lifted you up, stayed with you, gave you a sense of belonging. It's that relationship and the benefits of that relationship that will sustain you throughout your life. It is that relationship that will help give you the resiliency you need to move past any traumatic experiences you have faced and thrive as an adult. Who is your one? I recognize now that Mrs. C was my one. Mrs. C offered me a foundation of hope, a foundation of faith that has pushed me, propelled me, and sustained me silently throughout my life and through each grief experience I have faced into my adulthood. It's Mrs. C's teachings that have helped to keep me going and have helped me to thrive despite the difficulties I've faced in my past and in my present. Who is your one? Who can you be a one to? As adults, we have an amazing opportunity to be a one to a child or teen. If you are a child or teen and you have been impacted by a grief and loss experience or experiences, look around you. Who is your one? What is your grief experience? Speak it out loud. Feel it. You are not defined by the losses you have faced. Shine. Grab hold. Keep moving. Keep pressing. Who is your one? Who can you be a 1-2 or a 2-2 or a 3-2? There is so much hope.